At what age does your child get to decide how much time he or she is going to be spending with a parent? This is a common question that gets asked of a lot of family law attorneys by clients who are in the divorce process or the custody dispute process. And it also is usually indicative of a child who is resisting wanting to spend time with a parent for whatever reason. My guest here today is an expert in this realm. Her name is Christy Bradshaw Schmidt, and I'm so excited to get to sit down with her and have a conversation about the dynamics where children are resisting a parent. So thank you so much, Christy, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
The first thing, I just want to start off from sort of a very high level. What are some of the reasons why children resist spending time with a parent?
What we know now from the literature is there's lots of reasons. There's what we call enmeshment, which is where a child may have, they feel bad for a parent. They feel a parent may have been wronged in the divorce, and they feel that that parent is not okay if they're not with them. So they kind of take on that parent's emotions and those feelings.
Like a protective role.
Very protective role, kind of a parentified role. Mm-hmm. And so there's enmeshment, there's estrangement, where kids actually resist or refuse contact for justifiable reasons. Maybe you have a parent with an untreated mental health issue, substance abuse issue. Maybe you have just a parent who's been uninvolved or just lacks some really good coping skills as a parent. We have the big buzzword that is alienating behavior, which is where kids are resisting or refusing contact for unjustified reasons, where it's been influenced by a parent or a family member or a sibling or someone else. And then there's, alignment. They may just, if some kid found out their parents had an affair, they may see one parent is wronged in that situation. They want to align with them. Some kids just have an affinity for one parent.
Yeah. Yeah,
that happens in intact families.
Right. And that could be totally natural. So it's not always indicating that there's some kind of underlying pathology or that there's something wrong. But it is something to pay attention to, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what should a parent do if they are feeling like they're the rejected parent, maybe, and they feel like, my child all of a sudden isn't wanting to spend time with me? What do I do next? So what do you usually suggest?
That's such a great question. That's the hardest place to be in these cases, because you are fiercely protective of wanting to maintain your relationship with your child. It's horribly painful when your child resists contact with you, especially for unjustified reasons. Sometimes it's hard even when it's justified, because that requires some ownership. But it's real easy for parents in that position to get reactionary and to get angry and to get upset, and rightfully so. Those feelings are valid, absolutely valid, but we have to pull back. We have to think long-term. We have to think strategically and try and figure out, how do I keep my side of the street clean and work on my stuff that I need to work on? How do I try to co-parent with my co-parent to see if we can fix this? And maybe we need some therapy to start having some conversations to help us all have the coping skills to kind of repair that relationship and move forward.
One of the things I know that's really a hot topic these days is what you alluded to, is alienation. And so there's lots of information out there on parental alienation. And I think for a lot of parents who are feeling resisted, finding that reading about parental alienation can feel vindicating in some way. What are the dangers? Let's just talk about parental alienation.
Like I said, alienation is when a child is resisting or refusing contact for unjustified reasons. Probably most of the cases you and I see on a regular basis, there's some form of alienating behavior. It's hard as parents going through divorce not to accidentally slip up and say something negative about the other parent.
Or not even roll your eyes at that moment, right?
Nonverbals can be just as powerful. But it's real easy to jump to conclusions that that's what's happening. And certainly those behaviors often exist. And there are absolutely cases where that's 100% what's occurring. In my experience, a lot of them, we call them hybrid cases. There's lots of things going on that's contributing. There may be some alienating behavior. There may be some poor parenting that needs to get fixed. There may be some conflict that needs to be managed. And so usually it's not the one big word though we certainly want to watch for those behaviors and mitigate those behaviors. But often the families, at least that I see in my experience, there's more than one thing going on to be fixed and resolved.
Yes, for sure. And when I think about the pattern of sort of where we see alienating behaviors happen, usually there is at least a really good relationship, a good strong parent-child relationship, and then the events begin to happen or whatever, and all of a sudden the child isn't wanting to spend time with a parent. Can you talk about that a little bit? Why is that always the other parent's fault?
Not necessarily. Like I said, sometimes it's, mom, dad, or mom and dad get in a conflict, and they have a high conflict scenario that the kids have seen and been exposed to. And kids just want to pull back from that and not be in the middle of that. So they want to avoid those situations, and they want to just be, I'll just pick a parent just to stay out of the middle of it. Sometimes it is that alienating behavior that's causing it. It's that outright direct or indirect, overt, covert, intentional, unintentional behavior that negatively paints that parent in a negative light. Or like you said, it's those nonverbals where they know they don't get along. They know they don't support their relationship with the other parent. It's not okay to call the other parent and say, I won an award at school today because it's going to make my other parent angry. They know those things. And so there can be overt and covert, even if it's not alienating behavior, just a lack of support that the kids know. And we want to watch for those things and figure out how to mitigate those so that we can get them out of the middle of that and allow them to have that healthy relationship with both their parents and get back to that relationship they had with that other parent.
Exactly. Now, what happens if you're the parent who is maybe the favored parent, right? The child does want to spend time with you. They don't want to go over to the other parent's house. What do I need to be concerned about on that end, and what steps should I be taking?
First of all, I certainly don't ever want to tell a parent, don't believe your child. But children don't always tell the truth. Anybody who's had a 2-year-old that, said, did you take a cookie? And they've got crumbs all over their mouth will tell you, no, they didn't take a cookie. So, and kids have a very limited world view, right? They're looking through the lens of the world with very limited life experience. So we want to listen to kids and say, okay, what's going on? But we don't want to just run and be protective of that, because at the end of the day, if your kid's struggling with going over to the other parent's home, certainly number one, you've got to follow what the rules are. And that's what your order is, or what the judges told you have to do, or even what y'all may have agreed to. You got to follow the rules, and you want to teach your kids to follow the rules. But if there's some area of distress or anxiety or stress that's coming from that, then let's go fix it. If you had a kiddo having school refusal, you'd be like, well, maybe you need to go get some therapy to figure out what this anxiety is about and put some tools in your toolbox for managing that and help you move forward and repair things and fix things and get things right on the right track. But leaning in and going, you don't have to go, certainly can not only land you in trouble, but it also makes things worse and makes things that much harder to repair.
And one of the things I think that's interesting parents don't realize is that when you give in to that, you're actually putting your child in the position of controlling that. And in the moment, that may feel like the right thing to do, but really kids don't want to be in the middle. They don't want to be making those decisions. Am I right? Let's talk a little bit about from the child's perspective.
It depends on the age. You've got teenagers who will absolutely tell you they have a right to know what's going on. But we also know kids' brains aren't fully developed until they're in their mid-20s. And they have parents for a reason. And so what they think they need to know, what they think they need to control, is not necessarily in their best interest. And sometimes telling them no, and I'm sorry, and I hear you, and I understand, and I can validate your feelings, but we don't have to lean into giving you what you want and giving you control in the situation. Kids, the goal of parents is to get your kids to be independent, self-sufficient adults and to teach them to deal with hard times and hard experiences. So if they're having anxiety or stress, let's learn how to deal with it.
Now, obviously, there are times as we talk, if there is something going on, for example, if there's substance abuse happening, or there's, maybe the other parent's in an abusive relationship or something, and there are those underlying concerns, then those are reasons why we would take some legal steps to protect the child.
Absolutely. And you still want some therapy for that, because that kiddo still needs some coping skills to just understand what's happening, regardless of what the schedule is. They need the coping skills to manage that. If they've got a parent with a substance abuse issue, they may need some psychoeducation about what does that mean?
Right.
What does that look like? But we want to preferably get that parent into some therapy and let them do some work together to repair things and get back on track if it's possible.
I always say, there's, as a parent, you've got this really strong desire to protect your child from anything bad happening. And that's a good desire, especially when they're little and they are dependent on your protection. But I always tell people that the more important role that we have as parents is actually to prepare our children, right? And that's where therapy is the tool in the toolbox that can really help them differentiate from all the other stuff that's going on.
Right. And I try and teach parents when I'm working with them and they're like, but this is going on with the other parent and I have to tell them how to deal with it. I'm like, lean into life lessons. If they come home and they're upset about something that happened at the other parent's home, take it to school. What are you going to do if that happens with a teacher? Or what are you going to do if that happens with a friend? You're teaching them those tools for their toolbox without correlating it to their parent. And
Exactly.
that prevents you from talking negatively. That prevents you from not supporting that relationship. You're still giving them the life skills they need to prepare them to get to adulthood.
Do you see parents who maybe they've gone to court and they don't agree with the court order, and so they're not following it?
I
do.
do.
See those situations? How does that work out usually?
Not well in my experience. And if those are my clients in a consulting role, I'm like, you have to follow the order. That is the rule. That unless y'all want to try and reach an agreement, we can talk about co-parenting that issue, but we don't get to not follow either A, what we agreed to, if the court has signed off on it, or B, what the court tells us to do. Those are our adult rules we have to follow.
So let's talk a little bit about how you work with families. What is your role? And we'll talk about some different options parents have if they're in one of these situations.
I do a lot of custody evaluations. That's part of my job. And that's a court-ordered neutral role. I only do so many of those, but that's helping the court decide what's really going on. So if you have a case where a child's resisting or refusing contact, the only person who can say what's happening and why that's happening, besides a judge, is a custody evaluator. You have to have done a full evaluation of everyone in the family to really know why that resistance or that refusal is happening. So that's one thing. But another large part of my role, besides doing just expert testimony for families on this topic, is I do a lot of consulting with attorneys in a confidential role, and that's helping attorneys with strategic legal support and, kind of managing their case related to the mental health issues. But it's also just coaching parents through that process of, let's slow down. Let's breathe for a minute. Let's not make those reactionary decisions. And maybe you need to go to therapy, and let's talk about that and who that needs to be. Or maybe we need to talk about how to get your kid in therapy, and let's talk about how to do that.
Because even if it feels like this is all being done to you, if you're the parent who's being rejected, the reality is you actually have a lot more control and influence in the circumstance than you even realize, right?
Absolutely.
So what steps can that parent do to help change the dynamic on their side of the street, so to speak?
Right. One is let's focus on their side of the street, and let's focus on, get your own therapy would be my first step. Reaching out to the other parent to see if we can co-parent into some family therapy. If not, that's a great reason to use the court, just to go in and go, we need some family therapy here.
Yeah.
Before this gets any worse, right? Because if you've got resistance and not yet refusal, time's your enemy. So the quicker you can get that family into therapy and get your, family moving into that process, the more likely you can prevent a cutoff or a refusal in that relationship. So that's goal number one. But certainly your child, and this is a lot of money, I get it. So you kind of got to figure it out. But your kiddo having therapy absolutely is important. Family therapy is important. But if you're struggling personally in that role to figure out how do I keep my side of the street clean, maybe every parent's got a part in this. Even if you are technically innocent, there's always stuff you can do better as a parent. Nobody's perfect. Lean into that. What can I do differently? If my kid's complaining about something that's trivial, listen to that. Make some changes.
And I think that's so helpful for parents, because if you're the one who's been rejected, there's a lot of feelings, and you've talked about that. There's grief over the loss of the relationship. There can be anger. When you're with the child can be triggering you and saying things that are really, really hurtful that you feel very defensive about. And so there's so many ways that are very natural for a parent to respond. But when you're in that dynamic, it can be really destructive.
It's emotionally charged and stressful. And that's when you sometimes have to take a breath, and be the parent, be the adult in that moment. Sometimes it's okay to go, I'm frustrated right now. I'm going to go take a break.
Yeah.
You chill out in here for a minute and I'll be back, because you're not going to react well. give yourself permission, because unless your child is in a unsafe situation, you're allowed to take a time out.
And in fact, you're teaching your child a very important lesson in that moment.
You're modeling that, right?
Yeah.
And you're modeling what you want them to do with that.
Yeah.
But you've got to remember their brain's not fully developed. Like I said, they're still learning coping skills. They may be just lashing out because it's the only thing they know how to do, or it's anxiety, or it's their stress, or their fear, real or imagined. And teach them how to manage that in the
Is
moment.
this true that sometimes when a child actually feels safe with a parent, that parent may experience more of the emotional breakdown with the child?
Sometimes. Kids sometimes will lean in and react in ways where they know they are safe and where they will be heard.
And it can kind of be the emotional release. So just because your child's having a lot of negative emotions around you doesn't mean it's personal to you, right?
Right.
Okay.
And kids don't understand what's going on in those dynamics, right? They know how it feels, and it's lots of big feelings. It's lots of big emotions that they may not have the tools in their toolbox to manage. Don't feed into that with them. Be the adult, be the parent, take the breaks you need to, use your own toolbox.
Yeah.
And that's why
learn.
therapy can be helpful.
Yeah. And learn some new skills. I mean, this is just, you've not had to parent this way before, right? And you probably don't know a lot of parents who have. You may feel very alone, but there are new skills to acquire this time.
Always. Divorce leads us into new skills, right? And no kid comes with a handbook. Especially in these situations. And every child's different. And you've got to figure out how to manage that, especially if you got more than one.
Let's talk about your role as a custody evaluator. So when there are allegations of the resist refuse dynamics happening, what are you looking at to help assess the situation?
Our law is real clear, all the things we have to do. There's a lot we have to do. So I'm interviewing everyone. I'm doing observations, and I'm interviewing the children. I'm interviewing personal collaterals, so personal references. I'm interviewing professional collaterals. I'm checking CPS records and police reports. I'm looking at all the data that I can get. And what we do in those processes, we're weighing, all that list of reasons kids resist or refuse contact. That's kind of my starting list of hypotheses. And then I add to it as I start to learn things. And then I see, where does the data take me? And it's not necessarily what everybody says, because I got to be able to verify what everybody says, including your children. But I'm looking at, okay, what does the data most support? And then it's less about a label as to why it's happening. It's more about what services does this family need to get back on track and move them forward and get those relationships reestablished before that kiddo reaches adulthood and there's a permanent cutoff, because that's ultimately our goal, is to prevent that.
Yeah. And I think we parents often don't understand, like, it can be easy when you're in conflict with the other parent to think, if I just got rid of the other parent, things would be easier. But the long-term consequences are so severe for your child to be estranged from a parent.
Absolutely. The literature is very, very clear when we talk about, when there are parents who are cut off, the impact that has on, and they're working on and have longitudinal studies on, what happens when those cutoffs happen and there's no relationship. What do those relationships later look like? Sometimes those children come back around in adulthood. Sometimes when they get remarried and their spouse is like, where's your other parent? That kind of prompts things to happen. But then there's how much time has been missed.
Yeah.
And how many opportunities have been missed. So I'm a firm believer, any therapeutic intervention we can do before that kiddo reaches 18 to try and repair this, or at least leave the door open before they're 18, is vital to making sure, if there's some level of a cutoff, hopefully it's as short as possible.
What do you see when you're looking at sort of patterns of behavior? What are some of the most damaging things that a well-intentioned parent does in the parent-child relationship?
You mentioned some of it. It's the rolling of the eyes. It's the having phone calls when you think little ears or big ears are not listening, and you're talking to your parent or you're talking to a friend. You've got to be real careful having any conversation about your true feelings when your kid's in the home, because they're nosy.
They are.
And they often want to know what's going on. You got to be able step outside, go outside, make sure they're not where they can hear things. But don't roll your eyes. If they're excited about something with their other parent and want to tell them, if it's not in the middle of trying to go to bed or your routine, let them make a quick phone call and tell their parent they're excited.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to do that. And some of it is, you got to fake it till you make it. Even if you're angry at the other person, you got to take your kid's best interest into account, lean into those opportunities to be supportive. That doesn't mean you let your kid call a parent to avoid bedtime at 9:30 at night. But certainly if it's 3 PM and they want to say, I got an award at school, let them do that. And then talking badly about the other parent, obviously, whether that's intentional, overt, covert, unintentional, you just get angry and you react in the moment. that's damaging. They're half of you. They're half that other parent. That damages their self-esteem, and it paints a negative picture in their head of their other parent.
It really does. But I will say, I mean, I know just, from working all the families that I've worked with, that co-parenting relationship, building a healthy, strong co-parenting relationship is so challenging. It's just so challenging. So we talk about it all the time, like be a good co-parent. But when the other side isn't co-parenting, if they're not keeping their side of the street clean, right, then oftentimes we're responding in ways that maybe are less than. So how do you how do you help support somebody to be a good co-parent when the other parent clearly is not co-parenting?
Well, there's great books out there that are written for parents. One, I do not like the name, but it's the 33 Co-Parenting Solutions Relating to Alienation. That's not the exact name, but it's by Matthew Sullivan and Jack Moran, and I'm blanking on the last person it's by. Okay. But I'm happy to get you the information on that. But it's an easy read. It's literally the 33 Co-Parenting Solutions, and it talks about the different roles that co-parents take, even when one's not willing to do things differently. And it's a great little place to just go back and get a reminder of how do I respond to this message. And then Bill Eddy's stuff. He's got a zillion books, brief, informative, friendly, and firm. What a great approach. And some of it is you just have to be the consistent one over and over again who writes those messages, who focuses on the kid, who does not respond in emotion. You set the example.
You set the example, and you do what's right because that's in alignment with who you are, right? We can't control the other side, but I can give the information that I would want to be receiving. I can, decide whether I'm going to give additional time for this family event because it's the right thing for my child, whether I get it back or not, right? But too often we see people devolve into that tit for tat. Well, he didn't do this, so I'm not going to do it.
Well, we have to remember it's not our time. It's our child's time. Mm-hmm. And if that time's important to your child, sometimes it's important to make a sacrifice so they can go to that family wedding or go to that funeral or go to that family reunion or whatever the event is. Sometimes you just got to do the right thing because your kid needs that. Unfortunately,
Christy, I have a feeling we're preaching to the choir. Probably the person who's watching this and is interested in being a better co-parent, is the one who leans into these things. But I do want to say that I just want to recognize it can be really difficult to be in the position of trying to raise your child and always be the one who's doing the right thing when the other one isn't.
It's very hard. And it's important in those moments that you have good friends, that you have good support. If you need a therapist because you're really struggling with that, go see a therapist. But take those times to go get a massage, go for a walk. If your kiddo's with the other parent, have a girls' night, have a guys' night. Turn it off. Yeah. Give yourself permission to have a break from it because it's hard. It's parenting's a full-time job.
It is.
Stick co-parenting and a divorce on it, and that feels like that's 2 full-time jobs in addition to your own full-time job. And so giving yourself some grace. You're not always going to be perfect. Nobody's looking for perfection. We're just looking for consistency.
One of the things I always like to do is end on a message of hope. And so when we talk about families who are sort of in crisis and living in the conflict, have you seen situations where they looked hopeless, but they got the right intervention and things were able to turn around? I guess what message of hope would you have for our families?
I have absolutely seen therapy work. I've seen family therapy work. I can speak from a personal experience. A friend I went to high school with had no contact with his kids for 15 years until his kid got ready to get married. Oh. Called him 4 months ago.
Wow.
And they have reconnected. 15 years of no contact.
Yeah.
And it happens. And he was patient. And he did not push, and he did not blame, and he wasn't all over the internet posting negative stuff about his ex. He just waited patiently and trusted that in time things would happen as they should. And so it does happen. And that's hard, though, to live those years.
Really hard.
Really hard. But don't give up.
Yeah.
Don't give up.
Take the steps to make sure that the door is always open on your side of the street.
Don't ever slam the door.
Yeah.
In anger or frustration. Always leave that door open.
This is such great information. We're going to include a link to Christy's website so you can look it up and learn more about her. And we'll also include a link to the book, the 33
Co-Parenting Solutions. I'll go find the actual title.
I love it. I don't have that in my library yet, so I'm going to add a new book to my library. So thank you for joining us, and be sure to subscribe for more great content. Thank you.